All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy today to be interviewing Denny Burda. I'll just explain a little bit, Denny, how we met. So Denny's wife, Marina, was my one of my clients. She is amazing. And we worked together for a while, building her business and kind of shifting a little bit her business. And then she worked with me doing marketing work. So to keep it in the family, and then Denny, you and I met, which was so great. So why don't you tell my listeners just a little bit about who you are, and what you do in your background?
Yeah, sure. I'm Denny Burda. I'm a CCO for River Consultancy Group, and we label ourselves as a executive advisory consultancy firm, which essentially means we go in and we speak with leadership for various size and shapes of companies, all the way from advising new businesses, startups, all the way to kind of Series B, even some Series C level funded companies. And we kind of go in with an end-to-end strategy and say, talk to us about your business, tell us where you're at and where you hope to be. And with our partnership group, which includes other consultants, including yourself, Jamie,
Mhm.
we have the opportunity to go in and really solve not one pain point, but the pain points across the board that will actually help that company move from where they are to where they want to be. And I've been CCO River for about a year now. Prior to that, I worked in the SaaS industry for about the past decade, with companies like Atlassian. I was a partner for Microsoft for a number of years. Also had some time as a head of international customer success in the legal tech industry. So I did a long career working in technology, working with technology companies from very, very small all the way to very, very large. And primarily, I worked in the post sales side, customer success. And that's kind of what fueled the desire for me to start River. It's where I met my partner. James was at one of those companies. I was the head of customer success, and he was the senior vice president of it. And we both saw that a lot of the pain points that not only the business was facing, but actually the customers, the end users were facing, happened in the pre-sales cycle. And it always started with, if you just, kind of started with your North Star just slightly off from center, by the time you got to the place where you hoped you had healthy, happy customers and growth and a good relationship on both sides, a few degrees off this way or that way at the start, ended up way off at the end. And so we created River with the idea that actually, if we can come in and help businesses kind of align and have that true North Star to begin with, you develop your business in a more sustainable way, in a more supportive way of not only your end users, your customers, your clientele, but also in a way that you build a happy, healthy organization. People want to be part of it. People want to be part of the mission and vision of it. And they're also invested in the health and well-being of their coworkers. And so at the end of the day, that's kind of where River's at and in what we do. I've been asked a few times now, as the company's maturing, okay, well, what's your guys' mission statement? And it's pretty simple. We just said we want to help people, and so we've taken that methodology to every meeting and every engagement we've had, and we figured out, is that helping an entire organization? Is that helping an individual person? Is that helping the customers of that person? And so it creates a new challenge each time, but an interesting and fun one.
I'm so glad that you're here to talk about this because this is why I'm excited to also work with River because I think we have a similar mission. The way I
Mm-hmm.
phrase mine is I want to take away people's pain at work
Mm-hmm.
because these are pain points, but they genuinely, I work more on the leadership side and kind of the culture side. And when that North Star is misaligned, it really creates this domino effect of pain instead of ease, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that it's so interesting when you're an employee, and that's kind of how you were inspired to move in this direction when you're an employee and you can see the North Star but the organization doesn't necessarily see it the way you do.
Mhm.
This was my issue, at least as an employee. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, it's here. It's here. Trust me, it's here. And they were like, just
Mhm.
stay in your lane. That's not your job.
Yeah.
And then I went, and then I left organizations. And then it's so funny because then they brought me in, not the same organizations, but then I was brought in for the value of you see the North Star, help us get there,
Mhm.
instead of as an
Mhm.
employee where it was like, I see the North Star and they were like, yeah, but that's not your job. So stop paying attention to the North Star.
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit more about as an employee, like having the vision that you could see where breakdowns were happening and how that's translating into the work that you're doing with River.
Yeah, so I have a relatively recent example, and it I was speaking with a fairly senior account executive about one of his accounts, and um, marquee account with his business, about 4 million annually in revenue, 4 million euro, and he was struggling because the relationship's getting to a good point. There had been kind of a before his time rocky past, some escalations with different parts of the technology, and so it's been essentially it was the sales deal followed by with a 3-year contract followed by 3 years of a lot of fighting to get close to what they were promised. And now in year 3, the salesperson, this AE, kind of finally feels like they're there, but now he's got to handle the renewal contract. He's coming in for the first time that they've had to deal with very standard SaaS things, price increase, new products to consider, evaluating the products that they bought that, some of them they kind of loved, some they learned from, and some they absolutely loathe. And so now he just kind of asked for my insights and my advice, because he said, if you were in this position, what would you do? And I just looked at him and I laughed. I said, I'd be honest with them. And he goes, what do you mean? I go, well, he shared with me roughly the numbers, kind of what they were using. And so they had some products that they were absolutely maximized on. They bought 12,000 licenses of this product. They were using all 12,000. In fact, they bumped that up even, of course, over the contract. And then they had 2 other products that they had. The original deal was basically just a wall-to-wall deal. But within that, they had 2 of those products that, even though they'd purchased wall to wall, they just never really got off the ground. One was using 500 out of 12,000 licenses, and the other was using about 2,000 out of, I think, 5,000 licenses. And he's going, what do I say to them? They're going to be furious when they realize they've been paying for this, for 3 years and not used it. And I said, well, by being honest, by resetting that North Star, maybe what you can do in this position is actually just say, hey, we haven't matured in these areas yet. It was a big enterprise deal. The previous salespeople maybe got big starry eyes and kind of realized they could sell everything, so they did, instead of value proposition and really building out a journey. I said, now's your opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to be honest with you and say, I don't think you need this here, but I do think you need this there. And I go, now you could push sales over everything else. And you could say, you could try and hope they don't notice that they haven't been using that side as much. And maybe instead of making this $4 million deal, a $7 or $8 million deal, you might allow the reduction, and instead it ends up at a $6.5 million deal. But I go, that's still a lot of growth. That's still very positive. It still makes them one of your marquee accounts. But what you're now doing is you're setting up a trust relationship from here on out that says, I'm only going to sell you what I think you need, or sell into you with this vision that we're going to work on together to get you to the next place. And I go, now you take that reduction, of these other licenses and the other tools they weren't using, you sell in what they are using plus what you believe they'll need. And then, by the way, if in a year's time, 2 years time, you go, hey, remember that thing that you were using 2,000 out of 5,000 licenses at? Now we think it fits your business case to go 10,000 licenses, and they're going to trust you. And it was really interesting because he was looking at me like I'd held some sort of crystal ball for what deal structure should look like. But I actually just shared with him, that's actually how in my past career in customer success, all the way to my first role, which was just as a customer success manager, I had the highest growth numbers of anyone in my organization in every role I held up until I moved to a head of role. And that's because for me, it was always about this conversation of going back to your customer and saying, what do you actually need? Where do we see the growth happening? And let's structure your journey that way. And that's one way to do it, obviously with an individual with a customer level, but quite often even in that journey, even though I could show those numbers, even when I'd worked myself up to a head of position, I was still fighting that conversation and going, well, you're not sales, stay in your lane. Um, you're not product, why are you telling product that this is important? Or you're not marketing, why are you saying you should be using these use cases? And I believe, and this is really what drove me and my partner James to want to start River, was that landscape is shifting. And we saw that because we started as customer success consultancy, just expecting to go train people how to do customer success, train that. And all of a sudden, revenue teams wanted to understand, and marketing teams wanted to understand, and executives wanted to understand, because what people have maybe started to realize in what might be considered a bearish term for the SaaS economy, or a downturn, is that the customers you have actually matter more than the customers you don't. And it costs so much to get a customer now, and it costs so much to retain a customer that you didn't start off on good terms with, that by actually just doing what's right for them and using the knowledge you can gather from the customer base that you have, these things have started to become the forefront of most executives we talk to. And so now, after 10 years of banging drums from the inside, I have this, I think, unique opportunity that I'm really grateful for, where even some of the businesses that I did work for are coming back and saying, hey, will you talk to us about this? Because now that you've left and moved on, and a few years later, we realized that you were saying this years ago. So how do we get on course now? And now I get to charge consultant rates for it instead of just my salary, which is
Exactly.
also very exciting.
Yeah. And own your time. Um,
Exactly.
you touched on so many things that I think are important, and I'm going to try to recap each one, and then we can decide where we want to go. But I don't want to forget the threads that came up as you were talking. I think three super important things. You talked about this idea of relationship building and transparency, even
Mm-hmm.
if that means less growth. And so I want to talk about that more, because I think in the model of typical businesses and this
Mm-hmm.
need for growth and this capitalist mindset, like it's only growth, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times, like you said, the salesperson might come in with these shiny eyes, like, ooh, there's so much money on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you lose trust, right? You even said it before we started recording. You're like, oh, I might have just gotten scammed. Somebody charged me $200 for this thing. I'm not sure if I just got scammed. When you don't have that trust, there's always that fear, like, did I just get scammed by this company that's trying to sell me a product? And I don't know if I
Mm-hmm.
can trust them. So, number one, I love that. And then another thing about just consultancies and this idea of seeing the North Star, but then understanding all the pieces and all the components. Like you were in there recognizing various pieces where things connect. Like, I need to talk to the
Mm-hmm.
product team. There's a marketing component here. We need to understand the customer. And then you start to see that whole big picture. And this is what I love about what you're trying to do with River also, is it doesn't start and stop with sales. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
start and stop with operations. It doesn't start and stop with people and culture. It's all connected. So when I work with bigger organizations and I'm working with the C-level team on business strategy and growth, I always end up talking to the operations team. And the
Mm-hmm.
operations team is pushing. And then the C-level team is we just care about the bottom line. And the ops team is but we can't get anything done unless you approve some of these things we're trying to do. And it's such an interesting kind of play on all these puzzle pieces. So I think that's important to talk about too. Um, but let's go back to this capitalist trust and transparency and relationship building, and how that's kind of part of your mission at River too. It's to help. but to help you with the things we think you need, not the things we don't think you need, but you're willing to pay for. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about that too, and how it's a little bit different than maybe a traditional consultancy or a traditional business model.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when sometimes I think the word scam and consultancy are almost synonymous.
Same with
And
coaching
I've
too.
worked,
Yeah.
yeah, and I've worked with at this point from the um, company side with consultancies coming in and being their customer. Pretty much all of the big four, a lot of the other large players, and sometimes you get to the end of it and you go, what did we pay for? What was the end result? What did we actually walk away with? And you know, a lot of the time it might be this very generic summary or playbook or guidancy that's handed to you by a junior analyst who's a year out of university, because you said our problem is this, or a consultant worse told you your problem was just this, and they handed you the playbook and they gave you somebody to just share the PowerPoints, and then you walk away and you go, what did we achieve? And that's where I think this idea of honesty and transparency plays a very critical role, and that's the core of River. Is we don't take any jobs until we've done as much discovery as we think it's necessary to really be honest about what a company needs. So we've even, it doesn't happen often that you turn away business as a consultant, but we've had times where we actually said, we don't think we can help you, or we don't think we're the best to help you. Which is actually, that was the very early days of River, and what spawned the idea to create the partnership group. Is we were getting people coming to us saying, hey, we really need executive coaching, for example, or we really need somebody to come in and help us with kind of employee satisfaction and things like that. And they wanted to add it into whatever work we were doing. And we just said, could we talk about it? Yes. But are we really going to get you to that end goal like you want and like we want for you? No. And so that's when we went and started finding partners to build out the group, because we were getting these sort of asks in, so that we could stop saying no and start saying yes, and actually start saying this is part of that total strategy. And I think it's a good representation. How we're trying to work is how we're trying to help businesses as well. And exactly what you said, when you go into a business and you've got the executive priorities and the operations priorities, product priorities, marketing priorities, it becomes very easy at almost any size of business. I think as soon as you break out of about 2 to 3 people, you start developing silos. And in a way, what I've tried to kind of start talking to companies about is that your business is really a community, no different than the neighborhood you live in, or the school you went to, or the university, or whatever kind of, when I say the word community, whatever group ties that sense together for you. That's kind of what business has been for a long time, and we've just kind of forgotten that. We've accepted the idea of corporate behemoth and the Metas and the Amazons and the companies with millions of employees worldwide, but you forget the odds are you're still working on a team, or you're sharing a small office, or you're going to a co-working space, or you meet for drinks after work, or you're part of a client team and you go work with a certain group of customers with the same people day in and day out. And there's tons and tons of employee satisfaction surveys out there, and more than what keeps you out of business, it's very rarely actually salary. It's very, very rarely actually even the type of work people do, but it's, do I enjoy who I'm working with and who I'm working for? And so that to me sounds like community. Do you enjoy the people you're hanging out with and the people you're going to meet? And so in a lot of ways, I think that's what we're maybe trying to do a bit at River, is reinstate this idea of how does a community function? And if you can pass that idea into a business and say, look, C-levels, like, obviously you have a massive amount of stress and pressure on your shoulders. You have to keep the doors open, the lights on, depending on it. You have to keep investors happy. If you're in the founder situation, you probably have to keep your families fed, and these big difficult decisions are coming at the top, and there's often a disconnect between those decisions made and what happens on the ground. And honestly, most executives, unless they're total narcissists, will admit that. They're like, the decisions I have to make are often influenced by very different things than what I'm hearing as feedback of the why are we doing sales this way? Why are we doing marketing or operations this way? Why are employees unhappy? Why are people leaving? We thought we paid top of the market and had pizza Fridays, but that it's that disconnect to actually say, are you building a system that respects and trusts and enables those people on the ground, and are you being transparent with them? Just like a customer coming into a sales deal, I see the same issue of when a leadership team, whether that's executive leadership or senior management or even just somebody who's head of a team, when they are disconnected, from what's happening with that group, the trust breaks down. And as soon as that breaks down, you start to hit all sorts of, frankly, business inefficiencies, things that start to cost you real life money and real life time and value. So I think, yes, that was probably a very long walk away to answer that question. But I think what we try to do at River, in what we value at River, is what we try to do exactly with our businesses.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too that you're making note of it's not always salary. And like we're saying too, we're connecting it to this idea of it's not always the biggest sale that you can make with a client. It's the best way you can help them. And it's the best way you can support staff and create that community or understand the community, understand the breakdowns in the community, which I think is really important to the whole feeling like everyone's working towards the same goals, because sometimes there's just so much breakdown that people forget what they're doing it for. So I think that's all important. But I think what's really interesting is that you want to foster this community inside of organizations you're working with. You want to foster a community inside of the organization that you're growing. And it's not, fundamentally, and like the mission of your business is not necessarily to have massive growth, but to have steady growth, just like any profitable business. But that's not necessarily the reason you're in it. Like you're kind of starting it in this organic way, and you're growing a group of people. What I think is interesting about the business model of River is something I'm seeing across the industry that I worked in previously, which was advertising and these kind of creative services agencies. And what I saw in the evolution of that space was a lot of brands bringing teams in. So building internal creative teams because they were spending so much money on agencies, not dissimilar from consultancies coming in and just charging enormous amounts of money and then not always seeing the outcome. Same thing in advertising. I mean, the amount of money spent on advertising for sometimes things falling on the cutting room floor and never even making it into the public, and like so much money being spent there. But what I think is interesting is like with creative teams going in-house or leaning on freelancers, I'm seeing a lot of agencies now having similar to a River model where there's an umbrella organization, but they're tapping into experts. So maybe they don't do PR, but they have a team accessible to them that does, or maybe they don't do video production, but they can pull in somebody that can manage that piece. And I think that business model is really interesting. Low overhead, competitive pricing. And that's really working in that world. So tell me a little bit about that kind of ambition with River and why you landed on this model of tapping into experts, but not having them on as staff.
Yeah. Well, so probably the easiest answer to that is necessity, because as I mentioned, James and I were starting to get asked. We came in expecting to talk customer success, and we found ourselves talking transformation or massive organizational problems or marketing or sales, even things that were not what we expected. But because I think there's this very dynamic shift in what businesses need right now, and that idea of slow, steady growth, it changed where businesses are focusing, which meant that it changed the asks of of consultancies. And so we could have, done what I think is the normal consultant route, which is fake it till you make it, and spoken into those areas and collected some extra. But I don't think we would have ever really grown or matured or established ourselves as an authority. At best, we would have done what the large consultancies do, which is do it once, make a playbook, and then rinse and repeat. But we believed that the challenges every business faced, even though they can be vastly similar, are also entirely unique. And so pretty early on, we knew we wanted to bring people in that we connected with, that we trusted, and that worked in a similar manner, and really at the end of the day had a similar value system. That idea that it's about what matters to the customers at the end of the day. So when I came onto the CCO role at River, James was pretty much making all the money. He didn't need me to come in. Originally I was going to pick up some of his work, lighten the load, so he could spend more time on business development. But after about 2 months, I said, I think what we really need is, we call ourselves River Consultancy Group, and group feels a little large for two people. So, what would a group look like? And so I just started following through different connections I'd made, different business partnerships I'd had, different referrals I'd had from people that, you should really meet Lisa, you should really meet Jamie, guys, you should really go talk to Rob. And as we met and grew our network of just like-minded people, we saw this opportunity to build this system that did answer that end-to-end need, but with people we trusted and people we wanted to work with. And I think that's kind of, two things that River does that I would advise anyone else looking to build a small services business would be, build it with people that you want to work with and care about. And it's okay to outsource expertise, because expertise is going to beat generalization 99 times out of 100. And it's going to show, a smart customer, if they're hiring your business or your services, is going to know the difference between generic and expertise really, really quick. And we've even had a few of our potential clients that we're talking to now say, I could tell you are experts when I looked on the webpage. And I have to thank our marketing expert, which happens to be my wife, Marina, because she took me and James's large rambled thoughts and got them condensed into nice, neat paragraphs. But people said, you said what I needed in a paragraph when other people send me a booklet. And that's kind of sometimes what expertise looks like. So how does River play out in real world? We're pretty open and honest with all our partners, and we say everyone in the partner network basically owns a 10% referral fee. So if we find business for you, or you find business for us, you get 10% of that business, because we all know in consultancy, that's one of the hardest things to do is to find work. And 10% isn't enough to make it hurt anybody. If you go, I'm doing this work for 90% of what I normally do, but it fell in my lap. Because often that 10% is more than made up in hours, but it also incentivizes us to look at the others in the group. So when we're meeting, we're no longer just trying to sell ourselves and sell our solution to one problem. We're going, I have a team of experts that can answer everything. And by the way, if I recommend, part of the group for this, I almost get a second job's worth of income just by getting to work with the people I want to, and they get the same thing. They either get a full sheet of work, or they find work for myself, for James, for you, and they get that. And so I think it's become, we haven't met another consultancy group that's doing it yet, which is really unique, I think. And even some of the people, when we were creating the group that we reached out to, that initially said, no, it's not for me, it's not for that, are starting to poke around. And it's actually kind of interesting. We've had to say, actually, until we're at capacity, until this group's so busy we need to expand, we've already built the team we want. And so we don't have to now think about, there's opportunity to expand, kind of like the salespeople with the big eyes and going, we could go bigger. But instead we go, fill what we have, and then find the next expert. And you and I have talked about this, that, you've kind of said, hey, do you need more people? Because I've got about 6 more, in the hopper that, we can load into this spot and this spot. And so what's really nice is I think every growth opportunity that's going to come River's way in the coming year or several years, we've already almost got the right person in mind for that, or the right people in mind for that. But our growth is always going to be determined, and our trajectory is already going to be determined, which is, I think, something very exciting as somebody who's, in their first year of a new business, to actually know exactly our trajectory.
Yes, that is huge. And I think it's so interesting because it's the opposite of how companies that hire their staff think, because
Mm-hmm.
they're thinking, I need to land enough work to
Mm-hmm.
support this structure. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's not always work that they want. It's not always work within their core capabilities. It's just work they have to churn to keep the lights on. And then what happens when you're taking all that work, your team then starts to go, we don't really
Mm-hmm.
like this work anymore. So it's
Mm-hmm.
so interesting because you're like grinding so hard to sell, and like do all this business development when you're running a traditional services agency with all these heavy
Mm-hmm.
staff members, especially in consulting and advertising where salaries are really high. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're just churning. And then ironically, the people are like, I'm not happy anyway. So I'm leaving, rather than the converse where you're like, I'm just gonna land the work we get and bring in the expertise as
Mm-hmm.
needed. Then you're really landing the kind of work that you think you're going to be, where you're going to provide the most value, rather than,
Mm-hmm.
oh, yeah, I just need to use this team. And even if they're not the experts, it's good enough. It's the junior person that can have a low bill rate. And so we're just going to use our junior team and make the most profit margin, which in no way is creating value for your client. It's
No.
all for you, like just to make sure that the business is running, instead of I need to provide, more value for the client or more help or take away pain or whatever the thing is.
Yeah, and the insanity of that model is it's maybe I think we could trace this type of growth mindset back to maybe about the early to mid 80s, as really the you can probably cyclically look back and say, oh, industrial revolution did it, and different points in history, but the late 80s was kind of the first, or early 80s was the first growth of the computer as a catalyst in growth of business. But that was also the time of this growth at all costs mentality really started developing, and beat the competition, be the biggest, be the best, all those sort of things. And um, it looks really good and it looks really huge, and that's because we highlight these epic stories of the biggest and the best and the ones that won, the Dell computers, the IBMs, the Apple, and they exploded, and so we suddenly are trying to repeat that model. But for every Apple computer out there was 100 more trying to do the exact same thing, that just pushed and ran the exact same race, but they just ran out of gas a little too soon, or they didn't quite have the right genius in there running it, and things like that. And we've adopted this model in almost every business, and in a sales mentality, you say, oh, well, we have to hire more salespeople because we have to grow, because we have to get this market. And when you reach the end of the line, it's been massive amount of effort with very, very, very little margins. And then depending on what you did to get to that point, the promises you made, the consequences sometimes push past that margin line, right? And so because you say, oh, because we did all this, we now have to do this. And so that's when, again, businesses go, well, the senior experts that we had moved on, they started their own consultancies, or they got a better offer. So now we're going to give what used to be this expertise to a junior analyst and hope they upskill fast enough and stress them out and see how bad they get. And then they'll probably, once they have the expertise, go do it somewhere else and things like that. And I think, again, it's that idea of sustainability. We're talking sustainability in manufacturing, we're talking sustainability in housing, we talk sustainability in how green is our car. And I don't think a lot of people go, how green is my business? How
Mm.
likely is it to healthily grow? We I made this comment, and I apologize, it's not the best analogy, but I said, most things that grow rapidly in nature are viruses, cancer, and weeds. you
Mm-hmm.
know how often, and I apologize, I went, but it's also kind of the point is there's not a lot of really beneficial, really good things that come on quick and grow rapidly.
Yeah.
But redwoods are gorgeous and beautiful, and some of the biggest things you can see, and they grow slow and steady over time. But they mature. And I think that's, the flip side of the, when I was making that comment was, I said, but think about things that grow slow and steady. Think about things that take time. And we just happened to be out in the country with this person I was talking to, and there was an old castle, 3, 4, 500 years old, still standing, still being used, and I go, that might have taken 50, 100, 200 years to build, but it lasted, double that. I go, how many houses, that were built in the 50s are already torn down? And it's always that same kind of model. Is, sometimes I realize, obviously, you have to go fast, you have to accelerate, you have to do what it takes to survive, but you're probably not doing something healthy. Whereas, slow, steady, sustainable, whether it's sales business, whether it's SaaS business, whether it's consultancy business, is really, in my core, what I believe is what will survive, especially right now when we're maybe in the tightest, toughest market we've been in since the kind of tech boom of the 80s.
Yeah. And that's important in reflection of your staff. Like, so in the companies you're supporting, thinking, trying to give them that same value set and remind them, because when I coach people, executive level people, or when I'm just coaching people around burnout, it's because of that, right? It's because of this race that the company has like lit this fire and said, we have to grow no matter the expense on the business or the expense on the people or the long-term cost of what it's going to mean. Like, we're going to churn through people. I mean, I've had business owners tell me, oh, well, burning through people is just a normal part of business. And it's like, okay, well, that's one way of looking at it. Or you save money by retaining a team that, again, you're like growing over time and it's steady and it's not pushing them to their maximum. Like looking at, if people set capacity at, I don't know, 70% billable, and then you're seeing people at 105%. I mean, I had a company shift their capacity to say, well, we used to be at 65%, so people had time for other things. Well, we're going to push that to 90%. And that was their goal across the board. And that's actually, I was an employee, and that's when I decided to exit the company. And what was clear to me was they were likely on their way to a sale, right? Like they were probably trying to sell the company. So they were just pushing people as hard as they could to maximize those profits. But to your point, it's not sustainable. And the irony is, like, these things that you're talking about, these rapid growth things, that's what people end up with, right? They're ending up with those things because they're churning so hard and pushing so hard for what? To your point, like you get to the end of the road and what is, I mean, okay, if we're talking Apples and Metas, the end of the road looks pretty good for a couple of the people at the top and like in, stockholders and things like that. But generally, if you're at, a mid-sized company and you're looking at that number at the end of the day, but then you're also looking at the churn rates and, lack of retention and people being in burnout and the cost of that. Oh yeah. They're likely pretty equal.
Yeah. And again, Meta, Facebook, Amazon, all of them, they are the top 1%. What do the other 99% of the planet do? Or the other 99% in this type of business do? And I want to add one more point because the other thing that James and I have been really lucky with early on with River is the groups we're speaking with. We've had a lot of chances to speak with non-executive directors, people who are helping other companies establish themselves, venture capitalists and private equity firms. And when we were building out what is basically our sales methodology, that kind of sustainable business growth methodology that we offer, we were meeting with a lot of these companies. And what we realized is the people who are investing now, because, just like there was a dot-com boom or a tech boom, there was a investor boom for the past few years where investors again pushed that just hyper fast unsustainable growth, because if they landed a Meta or they landed Uber or they landed they were rich, all of the investors were rich, all of the VCs in Silicon Valley were rich, but that was chasing unicorns. It was one in if you hit 1 in 100, you were happy. But as the market became more and more saturated, you didn't hit 1 in 100, you hit 1 in 1,000. And so you could offer less. And so if you're offering less, you're getting less of that 1 in 1,000 anyways. And all of a sudden money was tight. And I think it's really interesting. If you look at the number of Silicon Valley VCs now compared to 5 years ago, it's a significantly lower number. Because it became survival of the fittest. But now talking with a lot of those same groups, everything from we've met people who were just focused on angel investing all the way up to, Series B, Series C, getting ready for public even. And when they're looking at companies now that they want to invest in, they stop asking what's your TAM, how big could you get, could you be the next Facebook, could you be the next Amazon, is your global customer base really in the billions? And they actually say, what are your numbers the past 2 years? What is your churn rate if you're in software, for example, SaaS? How many of your customers are staying loyal? How many customer references do you think you could bring us to consider when we're evaluating investing in you? Because quite often with most of these things, these economic and business cycles, the change does start at the top. And so those investors, the ones we used to kill ourselves chasing, are now actually going, how sustainable are you? And I'm sure 20 years, 30 years, who knows, it'll flip to the other side again, and there'll be some great technology evolution that will have us chasing. But kind of in the meantime, for what I suspect will be the next few decades, what people care about is what they can know they'll get steady return on investment in for years to come. And so that's what we're encouraging people to build their businesses by. And like I said, that's what we're trying to do with River.
Yeah. Wow. That is the perfect note to end on. I feel like we went pretty full circle around
Yeah.
that. So I mean, I'm glad we can continue this conversation in other, realms and places, because it's important. And I think it's shifting the way we look at business and the way we run our own
Mhm.
businesses and what we're seeking and trying to accomplish, I think too. I mean, I also work with entrepreneurs, and all of this is really important for them to hear also, because
Mhm.
this, you want to run a race that you can sustain over time. I always tell people, when you launch the business that you want to be doing in 10, 20 years, not the thing that you think you can turn around in 6 months and start doing some drop shipping or whatever to make a quick
Yeah.
buck. Like, what do you really want to be doing and investing your time in, and really, learning over time and growing at that sustainable rate over time. So I love all the sentiment. I love everything you kind of brought to the table here. I think it's really helpful. Super fun. We'll keep this
Yeah.
going. But I'll stop it here so we can get you moving on to your other things today. But thanks again, Denny. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to talk with you. And yeah, I'm excited for what we get to do together with you as part of the River Group. Again, if you believe in everything we just said and you value people, then you have to invest in them. And that's why we knew getting an executive coach like you was so important to what we wanted to do as a business.
I love that. And I'm going to put all the information about River in the show notes so people can learn more. And I'll leave it at that.
All right. Sounds great. Well, thank you, Jamie. Have a great weekend and we'll talk soon.
Thanks.